It began with dust, the kind that clings to your lungs, your clothes, your dreams. America in the 1930s was a place strangled by hunger and fear. Banks had fallen, jobs had vanished, and every sunrise felt like a quiet dare to keep going. The roads stretched endlessly through cracked farmlands and broken towns, where hope was a rumor and the future felt like a cruel joke. In this desperate landscape, two young souls were born, Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow. Both children of poverty, both raised in the shadow of struggle. They didn't come from privilege or power. They came from dirt and determination. Bonnie, the girl who loved poetry, and Clyde, the boy who dreamed of fast cars and freedom. Two different stories, moving slowly toward the same inevitable collision. Bonnie grew up in Cement City, a rough corner of Dallas where the world was small and dreams were dangerous. Her father died when she was just 4, leaving her mother to raise 3 children on scraps and prayer. Bonnie wasn't the kind of girl who accepted smallness. She read novels, wrote verses in her notebook, and imagined herself somewhere grand, somewhere far from the rattle of dishes and the ache of hunger. She was bright, magnetic, with a spark that refused to dim. People remembered her for her laughter, sharp, quick, and full of mischief. But behind her eyes was that familiar ache of the poor, the knowledge that no matter how hard she smiled, the world didn't see her as someone who mattered. Clyde, meanwhile, grew up just outside Dallas, too, the son of sharecroppers who fought every day to stay one meal ahead of misery. He was small, wiry, restless, the kind of boy who could charm a teacher one minute and steal her pen the next. Life didn't hand him chances, so he learned to take them. By his teens, Clyde was already walking the edge. Stealing turkeys, breaking into cars, hustling his way through life one mistake at a time. But his crimes weren't born of malice. They came from hunger, for food, yes, but more for freedom. He hated the feeling of being trapped. By poverty, by laws, by the slow grind of a system built for someone else's comfort. As the Great Depression deepened, the world pushed back harder. Families lost homes, farmers lost land, men lost hope, and in the midst of it all, Bonnie and Clyde found each other, not in some cinematic blaze of fireworks, but in the quiet, accidental way fate sometimes works. It was 1930. Clyde was already known around Dallas for petty thefts. Bonnie was working at a cafe, wiping down counters and writing love poems on napkins during the slow hours. When they met, the world seemed to pause for a breath, two storms recognizing each other before the thunder broke. There was no doubt, no hesitation. It was as if they'd both been waiting for the other all their lives. She saw in him something raw and alive, something untamed that mirrored the fire inside her. He saw in her a kind of loyalty and passion he'd never known, someone who wouldn't flinch when the world turned dark. In that first moment, they weren't Bonnie and Clyde, the infamous outlaws. They were just two young people standing in the ruins of the American dream, daring to believe in something wild and impossible. Clyde's charm was effortless. He could make anyone laugh, but there was always a shadow behind it, a restless energy that warned of storms to come. Bonnie, on the other hand, carried light wherever she went, though she didn't yet know how fragile that light would become. Together they were balance and chaos, tenderness and fire. But fate doesn't offer gentle love stories to those born on the wrong side of the tracks. The world around them was shifting fast. The economy was dying and the law was hungry for easy scapegoats. Small-time criminals were hunted with the same zeal as murderers. When Clyde was arrested in 1930 for a string of car thefts, his world cracked open. He was sent to Easton Prison Farm, one of the harshest in Texas, a place where men were broken like wild horses. Inside, Clyde learned more than how to survive. He learned how to hate. The cruelty of guards, the violence of other inmates, the humiliation, it all burned away whatever softness was left in him. He emerged from prison not just scarred, but sharpened. The boy who once stole for fun came out ready to wage war against the world that had caged him. Bonnie, meanwhile, never turned away. Even as he sat behind bars, she visited him, wrote him letters, swore she'd wait. To her, he wasn't a criminal. He was a dreamer who'd been beaten down, and when he finally escaped, literally breaking out of prison to taste freedom again, she was waiting, heart in hand. It was then that their story truly began, the story that would soon make headlines across America. Bonnie didn't see herself as a partner in crime. She saw herself as his partner in life. But Clyde's path didn't lead to peace or comfort. It led to the open road, the endless hum of tires, and the taste of gunpowder on the wind. The first robberies were clumsy, desperate: gas stations, grocery stores, anywhere that offered a few bills and a quick getaway. But to them it wasn't just theft, it was rebellion. Every dollar they took felt like a victory against a world that had long ago abandoned them. They became addicted to that feeling. The rush of danger, the freedom of the road, the illusion that they could outrun everything that haunted them. For Bonnie, it was romantic. For Clyde, it was survival. For both, it was destiny, and though they didn't know it yet, the road ahead would be painted in both light and shadow, in the brilliance of love and the darkness of consequence. They were just two young souls chasing a dream through the back roads of America, leaving behind the ordinary and stepping into legend. But every legend has a beginning, and theirs began here, in the heart of a dying nation, where love was a rebellion and crime was the only language the world still understood. The dust, the hunger, the stolen kisses between car engines and midnight skies, these were the seeds of something unstoppable. They weren't fighting for riches or fame. They were fighting for a chance to matter, and in that desperate chase for meaning, Bonnie and Clyde would soon rewrite the laws of love, loyalty, and freedom, not with ink, but with bullets and blood. The story of two hearts bound by fire was about to ignite. The wind never stopped moving in the early 1930s. It carried the sound of train whistles, the smell of gunpowder, and the rumors of two names whispered across the South: Bonnie and Clyde. By now, they weren't just two lost souls running from poverty. They were outlaws in love, bound by a shared hunger for freedom and a shared defiance of everything that had ever tried to control them. Their world had no fixed address. They slept under stars, in stolen cars, and in the occasional barn when rain turned the earth to mud. Money came fast and disappeared faster. Every heist, every getaway, every near miss pulled them deeper into a rhythm, one where danger was the only constant and love was their only comfort. After Clyde escaped prison, he swore he'd never be taken alive again. The memory of those prison walls, the screams, the cruelty, it had burned something fierce inside him. He wasn't just stealing to live anymore. He was striking back, against the system, against the law, against fate itself. Bonnie followed without question. Some called her foolish, others called her loyal, but to her it was simple. The world had already chosen her path, and she refused to walk it. Beside Clyde, she wasn't just a waitress in a dusty town. She was alive. Every chase, every robbery, every breathless night on the run felt like she was finally living the story she'd always wanted to write. They started small: gas stations, small-town stores, the kind of jobs that barely made the papers. But as Clyde's confidence grew, so did the ambition. He wasn't reckless. He was methodical. He studied maps, back roads, escape routes. He had a knack for reading towns, for sensing where trouble might come from. Still, trouble always came. Their robberies rarely went smoothly. Shots were fired, cars wrecked, plans broken. But every failure hardened them. Every narrow escape stitched them closer together. They weren't Bonnie and Clyde anymore. They were a force, a moving shadow across state lines. Clyde began forming a crew, the Barrow gang. Some were old friends, others desperate souls with nowhere left to go. Among them were Buck Barrow, Clyde's older brother, and his wife Blanche, a couple who would later be dragged into the chaos that followed. Together they roamed the back roads of Texas, Oklahoma, and Missouri, living by the gun and the gas pedal. The newspapers began to take notice. Headlines started appearing. Crime couple strikes again. Clyde Barrow and Bonnie Parker wanted for robbery. Their faces began to appear on wanted posters tacked to post office walls and courthouse doors. But to the public, beaten down by the Great Depression, betrayed by banks and government, Bonnie and Clyde weren't monsters. They were symbols. Two young rebels striking back at the world that had left everyone else to rot. People admired them in secret. Mothers hid newspapers from their children, whispering that those two had guts. Farmers along the roads would sometimes leave food or gasoline for them, out of sympathy or thrill. It was dangerous to help them, but it felt righteous. In a country full of broken promises, Bonnie and Clyde looked like the only ones taking something back. As the Barrow gang's reputation grew, so did their crimes. They hit banks, not the big city fortresses guarded by armed men, but the small-town vaults where the tellers still knew every farmer by name. Their take was often meager, but it wasn't about the money. It was about the rebellion. Every robbery was a statement. We won't bow to your rules. Clyde loved his cars, especially Fords. The man drove like a ghost, sliding through corners, weaving through roadblocks, vanishing down dirt tracks before the law even knew what direction he'd gone. Ford himself once received a letter signed by Clyde Barrow, thanking him for making a damn fine getaway car. It became part of the legend, the Outlaw's endorsement. Bonnie, on the other hand, began to carve her own image. The newspapers painted her as the dangerous beauty, the gun-toting femme fatale in a beret. But those who knew her said she rarely pulled the trigger. She wasn't in it for the violence. She was in it for him, for Clyde, and for the strange, intoxicating freedom that came with every sunrise on the run. But the more they ran, the more dangerous it became. The law wasn't sleeping anymore. The Texas Rangers, local sheriffs, and federal agents began coordinating, tracking their patterns, predicting their moves. Every robbery left behind a trail of witnesses. Every photo found in an abandoned car added another layer to their myth. One night, in a quiet Texas town, they tried hitting a bank that was already empty. The depression had cleaned it out long before they arrived. As Clyde stared at the bare vault, Bonnie laughed, that wild, reckless laugh that echoed through the empty building. It was absurd, tragic, and beautiful all at once. They were chasing ghosts, but they didn't care. Their bond grew stronger with every close call. When the bullets flew, Clyde's first thought was always Bonnie. When she got injured in a car crash, her leg burned badly after one of their escapes went wrong, Clyde stayed by her side, carrying her when she couldn't walk, refusing to leave her behind. To him, loyalty wasn't optional. It was everything. They became the heartbeat of their own legend, living fast, sleeping in the shadows, and driving endlessly toward some invisible horizon. Each day was stolen from fate, each night a small miracle. Still, the pressure was building. With every robbery came more blood. Guards, police, bystanders. People started dying. And though Clyde told himself it was self-defense, something in his eyes began to change. The rage that prison had planted in him was now taking root. He wasn't stealing to live anymore. He was surviving to fight. Bonnie watched the man she loved slowly transform into a symbol of his own anger. And yet she never wavered. Her devotion was unbreakable, even when the world began to paint her as a devil beside him. The media began to glamorize them, publishing photos found in a captured camera. There was Bonnie, grinning with a cigar in her mouth and a pistol in her hand, standing on a stolen car. America was captivated. They weren't faceless criminals anymore. They were stars. Outlaws turned icons, and that in many ways was their real rise to power. Not in the money they stole, but in the myth they created. They'd become larger than life, part reality, part fantasy. And the more people feared them, the more people secretly admired them. Still, behind the headlines and the fame was exhaustion. They were constantly moving, through storms, through gunfire, through the endless noise of pursuit. They trusted no one. They never stayed in one place more than a night. Sleep was rare, peace was impossible, but to them it was worth it. They were untouchable, or at least that's what they believed. The world couldn't understand them. The law couldn't catch them. The poor saw them as heroes, and the press turned them into icons of rebellion. Bonnie wrote about it in her poems, scrawled on scraps of paper, tales of lovers doomed by fate, hunted by the world but unbroken to the end. She seemed to know, even then, that their story wasn't meant to last. Still, in those years, they burned brighter than anyone else. The Barrow gang's name was whispered in fear and fascination across every state line. From the back roads of Oklahoma to the muddy fields of Missouri, their legend grew. One bullet, one chase, one stolen moment at a time. They were unstoppable. At least for now, because in the world of crime, every rise has its shadow. And for Bonnie and Clyde, the higher they climbed, the darker that shadow became. By 1933, the legend of Bonnie and Clyde had grown so large that even the lawmen chasing them couldn't escape their shadow. Their names were etched in every newspaper, their faces pinned on every post office wall. They had become the most wanted couple in America, not for the money they stole, but for what they represented. Two lovers thumbing their noses at a broken world, daring to live free when everyone else was bowing down to survival. They moved constantly, slipping between the cracks of a nation too tired to catch its breath. The Barrow gang, Clyde, Bonnie, Buck, Blanche, and a few others who came and went, lived in a blur of gunfire and motion. Days bled into nights, nights into escapes. They were ghosts on wheels, and Clyde was the engine driving them forward. The car was their kingdom. It was the one thing that never betrayed them. Clyde's favorite, the Ford V8, roared like a beast on the open road. He could outrun any cop, outmaneuver any ambush. The highways were his veins, and every mile was another defiance against the chains that once bound him. Bonnie sat beside him through it all, her injured leg often wrapped in bandages, the scars from their earlier crashes never fully healing. But pain didn't stop her. She wrote poetry on the road, scribbling verses about their wildlife, love tangled with bullets, freedom paid in blood. She wrote because she knew what few people ever did, that every story of glory ends in tragedy. Their hideouts changed constantly, abandoned farms, cheap motels, forest cabins tucked deep into nowhere. In one such cabin near Joplin, Missouri, their luck almost ran out. They'd been hiding there with Buck and Blanche, enjoying a rare stretch of peace. But peace never lasted long in their world. The police tracked them down, tipped off by locals suspicious of the fancy car and steady stream of strangers. The gunfight that followed was chaos, deafening, violent, unforgettable. Bullets tore through the walls like thunder. The Barrow gang escaped, but the price was high. They left behind everything: weapons, clothing, even Bonnie's handwritten poems and photographs. Those photos changed everything. The papers published them across the country. There was Bonnie, posing playfully with a cigar and a revolver. Clyde, grinning in his fedora beside a stolen car. To the public, it was electrifying. They weren't just fugitives, they were icons. Young men cut their hair like Clyde. Young women mimicked Bonnie's beret and defiant stare. The couple's image became the symbol of rebellion, dangerous, romantic, unstoppable. The line between hero and outlaw blurred overnight. But for Bonnie and Clyde, fame was a curse wearing a smile. It made them legends, yes, but it also made them targets. Every lawman in America now had their faces memorized. Every small-town sheriff wanted the glory of being the one who brought them down. They couldn't stop. They wouldn't stop. The road was the only place they still belonged. They robbed banks across Texas, Louisiana, and Arkansas. But their hits were small, their profits slim. The myth said they were rich. The truth was they were barely surviving. Some nights they ate cold beans from cans, hiding in the woods like animals. Their clothes were torn, their nerves frayed, and every noise in the dark made them reach for their guns. Clyde's driving skill saved them more times than he could count. He knew how to lose a tail, sharp turns, sudden reverses, hidden dirt paths. To the men chasing them, he was a phantom. But even phantoms grow tired. The violence was catching up. They'd killed policemen, sometimes in panic, sometimes in cold retaliation. Each death tightened the noose around them. Every time they fired a gun, another state joined the manhunt. The Barrow gang was shrinking. Some members were killed in shootouts, others captured. The roads that once felt endless were now lined with danger. Bonnie and Clyde's fame had reached its peak, but so had their isolation. The more famous they became, the fewer friends they could trust. Even relatives began to fear the cost of helping them. The gang's world was shrinking, and the walls of law were closing in. Still, in the midst of chaos, their love never wavered. They clung to each other like shipwreck survivors, laughing in the dark, writing poems by lantern light, dreaming of a quiet life that they both knew would never come. Bonnie sometimes imagined settling down somewhere far away, a white house, a garden, maybe a dog. But every morning the sound of distant sirens reminded them that the world had no place for their kind of dream. One of their boldest moves came when they attempted to free inmates from Eastham, Prison Farm, the very place that had scarred Clyde years before. It wasn't just a rescue mission. It was vengeance. The attack was bloody, swift, and successful. Several prisoners escaped, guards were killed, and Clyde's legend grew darker still. But that raid marked a turning point. The government had had enough. The Texas Department of Corrections, embarrassed and enraged, called in the most ruthless man they could find, former Texas Ranger Frank Hamer. His mission was simple: hunt them, track them, and kill them. From that moment on, Bonnie and Clyde were no longer just fugitives. They were prey. Hamer studied their habits, their favorite roads, their family visits, their patterns of movement. He didn't chase them wildly like other officers. He watched, waited, and planned. Meanwhile, Bonnie and Clyde kept running, unaware that the hunter had already found their scent. But even as the danger grew, the Barrow gang continued to dance with death. Every robbery was riskier, every escape narrower. The once celebrated couple now looked haunted, thin, exhausted, paranoid. Bonnie's leg never healed properly. Clyde's nerves were fraying. Yet still they smiled for each other. Still, they believed they could make it out. America couldn't look away. Newspapers romanticized their story, turning bloodshed into entertainment. Headlines spoke of America's sweethearts of crime. Reporters followed every sighting. They became a symbol of doomed youth, lovers lost to a world that had already condemned them. But inside the myth, reality was grimmer. They were running out of money, running out of friends, and running out of time. Every town they entered was a risk. Every face they trusted could be the one to betray them. Their hideouts became smaller, their nights quieter. The laughter that once filled their camps was replaced by silence and the occasional cry of an owl. The road was still theirs, but it no longer felt like freedom. It felt like a long, winding goodbye. Still, Bonnie refused to stop writing. Her final poem spoke of fate and loyalty, of two lovers destined to die together. She didn't write like someone afraid of death. She wrote like someone making peace with it, and Clyde, he still carried that same grin, that same defiant spark. Even as the law's shadow grew longer, he kept his promise. He'd never be taken alive. In their hearts, they knew the end was coming. They'd become too famous to disappear, too dangerous to forgive. The world they'd once mocked was now sharpening its knives. But for a while longer, they lived in the illusion of invincibility, roaring down country roads with the wind in their hair, guns in the glove box, and a love so fierce it made even death seem small. The legend of Bonnie and Clyde had reached its peak, a storm of fame, fear and fascination sweeping across America. But every storm, no matter how fierce, eventually breaks. And for Bonnie and Clyde, that break was coming soon, in a quiet town called Gippsland, where love, crime, and destiny would meet for the last time. By the spring of 1934, the myth of Bonnie and Clyde had outgrown the people themselves. Newspapers called them public enemies. Ballads were written in their name, and every small-town sheriff dreamed of being the one to bring them down. But behind the headlines, behind the romantic photos and the poems, the real Bonnie and Clyde were tired, bone-tired, soul-tired, and running on nothing but the fumes of love and stubbornness. Their world had shrunk to the size of a car. The Barrow gang was gone. Friends were dead or captured, safe houses raided, and the few who remained loyal did so in silence and fear. The nights had grown longer, the roads lonelier. They slept in their car now, the Ford V8 that had carried them through storms and gunfire alike, and woke to the sound of their own breathing, still half expecting to hear sirens in the distance. Clyde's body was thin, wiry, his face pale beneath his hat. The constant running had eaten away at his health, but not his drive. He'd become more cautious, more deliberate, no longer the cocky boy who grinned at danger, but a man who understood that every sunrise might be his last. Bonnie, her leg still scarred from the accident months before, could barely walk without help. Yet she never complained. She sat beside Clyde through every chase, every shootout, every silent hour between one near death and the next. Her loyalty had hardened into something beyond love, a devotion that defied logic, defied fear, defied life itself. But the world had changed. The romantic haze that once surrounded their story was gone. People were no longer cheering for the outlaws. The deaths, the robberies, the bloodshed, they had added up. America, weary and wounded from its own suffering, no longer saw rebellion in Bonnie and Clyde. It saw chaos, and chaos always has to be silenced. Frank Hamer, the relentless ex-Texas Ranger, was patient. He didn't chase them like the others had. He studied them. He learned their habits, their patterns, their weaknesses. He understood what drove Clyde and what would trap him. Hamer knew Clyde's heart belonged to his family. He knew that no matter how far they ran, the Barrow boy would always circle back home. For months, Hamer watched the pattern unfold. Sightings near Dallas, then Louisiana, then back again. Each time Clyde would risk it all for a glimpse of home, for a few moments of normalcy. Hamer built his net from those moments, pulling it tighter with every passing week. Meanwhile, Bonnie and Clyde's hope was flickering. They still dreamed of escape. Maybe Mexico, maybe somewhere quiet. But deep down, they both sensed it. The road was running out. The law wasn't stumbling in the dark anymore. It was waiting in the light. One night, while parked beneath a canopy of oaks, Clyde stared into the distance, his fingers tapping the steering wheel. Bonnie wrote another poem, the paper trembling in her hands as she scribbled under the glow of a lantern. Her words were softer now, less about rebellion, more about fate. She wrote about dying together, about being remembered, about love surviving where people couldn't. They didn't know it, but she was writing their ending before it came. By May 1934, the net was complete. Hamer and his posse, 6 hardened officers, had tracked down one of Clyde's trusted contacts, a man named Henry Methvin. Methvin's father, Ivy, had struck a deal with the law, his son's life in exchange for helping them trap the Barrow pair. The setup was simple. Clyde often visited the Methvin home near Gibbsland, Louisiana. It was a quiet stretch of road, perfect for an ambush. Hamer's men hid in the brush before dawn, their rifles ready, their nerves wound tight. They waited, hour after hour, as the sun crept higher over the horizon. The air was thick with humidity and silence. Then around 9:15 a.m., the sound of a distant engine broke the stillness. The Ford V8 appeared, dust curling behind it like smoke. Clyde was driving. Bonnie sat beside him, humming softly, unaware that the world's patience had run out. They slowed when they saw a truck, Ivy Methvin's truck, parked awkwardly across the road, one wheel missing as if it had broken down. Clyde leaned forward, eyes narrowing, instinct already whispering that something wasn't right. But before he could speak, before he could even reach for the gear shift, the morning exploded. The ambush opened in a storm of gunfire. Over 100 bullets tore through the air, shredding the stillness, the car, and the dream all at once. Glass shattered, metal screamed, tires burst. The car jerked forward, then fell silent, its engine coughing one last breath before dying. When the smoke cleared, Bonnie and Clyde were gone, lifeless, slumped against each other, their faces still turned toward the road ahead. Clyde had been hit first, instantly killed. Bonnie's body was riddled with bullets, her head resting against his shoulder. It was over in less than 20 seconds. The men stood there in stunned silence, guns still smoking in their hands. After 2 years of chase, 2 years of fear and blood and myth, the ghosts of the open road had finally been caught. The car, once their chariot of freedom, was now a coffin on wheels, 130 bullet holes punched through its frame. Inside, the dreams of 2 young lovers lay broken, mingled with the smell of gunpowder and gasoline. News of their deaths spread like wildfire. Crowds gathered by the hundreds to see the wreckage. Reporters swarmed the scene, photographing the bodies, the car, the shattered glass glittering like cruel jewels in the sun. People stole souvenirs, scraps of clothing, spent shells, even locks of Bonnie's hair. The world that had once adored them now feasted on their downfall. In Dallas, their families received the news with the same mix of relief and heartbreak. They had known this day would come, but knowing didn't soften the blow. Bonnie's mother wept quietly. Clyde's family held their silence, pride and grief tangled together like old rope. When their bodies were brought back home, the crowds were unbearable. Tens of thousands came to see them, the heroes, the villains, the lovers who had defied everything and lost it all. Bonnie's coffin was covered in flowers. Clyde's was flanked by police guards to keep souvenir hunters away. And yet, as the funeral bells rang and the dust settled, something strange happened. The myth didn't die. It grew stronger. The world couldn't let go of them. The story was too powerful, too tragic, too human. They weren't just criminals anymore. They were symbols of rebellion, of love, of the eternal hunger for freedom. Hamer, for all his skill and patience, found no peace in victory. He knew he hadn't killed monsters. He had killed people, young, broken, desperate people who'd chosen the wrong road. The same system that had created them had destroyed them. Bonnie's final poem was found later, tucked in her belongings. The last lines read like prophecy. Someday they'll go down together, they'll bury them side by side. To few it'll be grief, to the law a relief, but it's death for Bonnie and Clyde. She had written her own ending before it happened. The trap at Gippsland wasn't just the end of two fugitives. It was the end of an era. The Great Depression's outlaws, the last of the wild romantics, had fallen beneath the weight of their own legend. As their blood dried on the Louisiana road, the world moved on. But their shadows never left. They lingered, in songs, in stories, in the way America remembers those who dared to live beyond the rules. The Ford V8 was towed into town, riddled and ruined, put on display for the curious. People stared in awe, not horror, because deep down, everyone saw a piece of themselves in Bonnie and Clyde, the part that wanted to run, to break free, to love without consequence. Their fall wasn't just the price of crime. It was the price of wanting more than the world would allow. And so, in a blaze of gunfire and love, Bonnie and Clyde finally found the peace they could never have in life. Together, forever, in the silence after the storm. The morning after the ambush, the road outside Gippsland still smelled of oil, blood, and gunpowder. The grass was torn where the Ford had skidded, and shards of glass glittered like tiny mirrors reflecting a cruel sunrise. The birds had returned to the trees, indifferent to the tragedy below, singing as if nothing had changed. But for the world, everything had. Bonnie and Clyde were dead. In that single moment of thunder and smoke, the law had reclaimed its ground. The newspapers wasted no time. By noon, every headline in America screamed their names. Bonnie and Clyde shot dead. The photographs showed their riddled car, their lifeless bodies, a grim trophy of justice. Crowds gathered in every town square, whispering stories, arguing over what it all meant. To some, they were monsters. To others, martyrs. To everyone, they were unforgettable. As their bodies lay in separate funeral homes, America's fascination deepened. Men who had sworn to despise them found themselves humming the ballads written in their honor. Women clipped their photographs from newspapers and tucked them into journals like forbidden relics. The press called them killers, but the people, especially those still broken by the Great Depression, saw something else. They saw defiance. They saw freedom. They saw two young souls who had refused to kneel before a world that gave them nothing. Bonnie Parker had been just 23 when she died. Clyde Barrow, 24. They weren't the cold-blooded masterminds the headlines painted. They were products of a desperate time. The 1930s had been a cruel decade, one that stripped people of homes, dignity, and hope. The banks foreclosed, the factories closed, and the government's promises felt distant and hollow. Then came two kids from Texas, wild, hungry, armed, and unafraid. They robbed the very symbols of power that ordinary people blamed for their misery. In doing so, Bonnie and Clyde became folk heroes, not because they were right, but because they were unbroken. Their story didn't end with their deaths.
It began there. As weeks passed, a strange transformation took place.
The lawmen who had killed them were hailed as heroes, but their fame faded quickly. Frank Hamer, the man who had orchestrated the ambush, gave no interviews, wrote no memoirs. He withdrew from the public eye, perhaps haunted by what he had done. The image of Bonnie's head resting on Clyde's shoulder would stay with him forever. Not as a victory, but as a burden. Meanwhile, the legend of Bonnie and Clyde took on a life of its own. Poets romanticized them. Singers wrote ballads in their honor. Hollywood would later take their story and turn it into gold, painting them as rebels, lovers, and tragic icons of youth. And maybe in some strange way, that's exactly what they were. Because if you strip away the blood, the robberies, and the guns, what remains is something painfully human. Two dreamers who wanted to outrun the world. Two lovers who built a kingdom out of speed and danger because peace had no place for them. Their families bore the weight of their choices. Bonnie's mother, Emma Parker, couldn't stand the glorification that followed. To her, Bonnie wasn't a legend. She was a daughter, the girl who wrote poetry, who loved music, who once dreamed of being a movie star. When she saw her daughter's face in newspapers, she didn't see rebellion. She saw loss. Clyde's family, on the other hand, held to a rougher pride. They had lived in poverty all their lives, fought for every scrap of survival. To them, Clyde was both sinner and son, the boy who took a wrong turn but never forgot where he came from. His mother would visit his grave often, brushing dust from the stone as if cleaning away the world's judgment. Bonnie and Clyde were buried separately, despite their wish to rest side by side. Even in death, the world refused them that small mercy. Yet people came by the thousands to visit both graves. Flowers appeared daily. Love notes, photographs, and poems were left by strangers who felt they somehow understood them. Years passed. The dust of time began to settle, but the myth never did. The Depression ended, America found its footing again, and a new generation grew up hearing their names whispered in fascination. To some, they were villains. To others, they were the last of the romantics, people who lived fast, loved fiercely, and died together under a sky that had no mercy. Their story became a mirror for every generation that followed. In the 60s, when rebellion once again took root in young hearts, Bonnie and Clyde were reborn on the silver screen. Warren Beatty and Faye Dunaway brought them back to life, stylish, fearless, beautiful. The movie blurred the line between truth and fantasy, but it didn't matter. People saw what they wanted to see: the allure of freedom, the tragedy of love, the price of defiance. And maybe that's what keeps them alive. Not the facts, but the feelings. The idea that even in a world of rules and walls, there will always be someone willing to break them for the sake of something wild and beautiful. The truth, though, was darker. Bonnie and Clyde's life wasn't a song or a movie. It was sleepless nights, endless fear, and the constant shadow of death. They starved more often than they feasted. They hurt people, many innocent, and left behind families who would never forgive them. But at the heart of it all, there was love, fierce, imperfect, and undeniable. Love that made them cling to each other when the world turned its back. Love that refused to surrender, even when surrounded by gunfire. That's the real tragedy, and the real lesson, because Bonnie and Clyde's story isn't just about crime. It's about how the hunger for freedom can twist into destruction when the world offers no other path. It's about the thin line between rebellion and ruin. It's about how love, in its purest and most reckless form, can both save and destroy. Standing in the silence of their graves today, you can almost feel it. The echo of their laughter, the roar of their engine, the fleeting joy of two souls who chose the road over the world. Their names may be carved in stone, but their legend still moves, restless as the wind over the Texas plains. They've become more than outlaws. They've become symbols of the fire that burns in every person who refuses to live small. And perhaps that's why, even now, we keep telling their story. Not because we approve of what they did, but because we recognize the part of ourselves that longs to be unchained. Bonnie and Clyde remind us that love can make us brave, but it can also blind us. That rebellion can feel righteous, but it can burn everything in its path. And that even the most beautiful dreams can turn deadly when chased too far. Their story is a warning dressed as a love song. So when the night grows quiet and the roads stretch out like veins across the dark, listen closely. Somewhere in the distance you might still hear the faint hum of a Ford V8, carrying two lovers toward a horizon they'll never reach. Bonnie's head resting against Clyde's shoulder, her hand wrapped around his, the wind in their hair, the world fading behind them, forever running, forever remembered.